He's 40 feet away near the timeline. Now Jimmer sizing up Moss. Oh, no. Oh, yes! Oh, yes! For Jimmer.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Jimmer Range podcast. This is episode 52. I'm Carl Heiser, joined as always by my co-host, Alex Cervantes. Alex, how you doing?
I'm great. It's everyone's favorite Jimmer Range episode where you and I talk too long about our favorite teams.
Absolutely, yeah. So expect 20 minutes, respectively, on Maryland and Northwestern, 5 minutes on everyone else, because, I mean, let's be real, everybody's the same in the Big Ten. Yeah, so in case, if you hadn't picked up on it by now, this is the Big Ten preview episode. We did the ACC last week, so go check that out. That episode's out on all platforms. And we've got just this absolute mess of a conference in front of us where every team's going to go 10-10. All 18 of them, 10-10. We had Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington to the mix. And we thought it was only right to have a convoluted preview to go with a convoluted conference. So hopefully that will be reflected in today's episode. Alex, starting out, you mentioned pre-show that you wanted to talk about the conference's national title drought.
Yeah,
the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, listen, I know it's a talking point every year at this point. Yeah, I've never seen a Big Ten team win a national title in my lifetime. So we're going on. I mean, again, the Titanic. It's been 84 years meme is recycled every offseason, every preseason. But here we are again. And it's not for a lack of this conference putting teams in the Final Four or getting to that national title game, as in Purdue last year. I mean, Michigan State, I'm thinking in 2019. I'm going to forget teams now, but Wisconsin in 2015. Like, the Big Ten has been right there. It's not for a lack of opportunities. I think coaches will say that it's because the conference beats itself up in the 20-game slate that it plays year-round. When you add four new teams to the mix, that'll certainly be the case. But I would push back against that narrative a little bit because it implies that teams in other conferences don't beat each other up. So you don't find the Big 12 teams complaining about how deep that conference is and how grueling kind of that January-February stretch is. So I don't know. I think it was interesting that Izzo at Big Ten Media Days was like, yeah, that criticism's fair. But in listening, and I was just thinking about it, obviously, in the context of this episode, but also Joe Mazzulla, head of the NBA champion Boston Celtics and the king of all media scrums, the best quote probably among coaches right now on the planet, had this to say about the Boston Celtics in their current window today. He said, and whether there was pressure to kind of take advantage of that. He said, and I quote, "Zero, no pressure. We're all going to be dead soon and it really doesn't matter anymore, so there's zero pressure. You're either going to win or you're not." And I think that applies to the Big Ten. And I think we should take the pressure off the Big Ten to win a national title game. And maybe they'll win one, you know? Like, I think that we're putting too much stock into if the Big Ten can do it. And I think we should flip it and just adopt this mentality. Because, yeah, we're all going to be in the dirt soon enough. Might as well just live in the moment and try to advance as far as we can.
I mean, one thing, though, I will push back on the Mazzulla thing because part of his quote was like, he was talking to the media members and he said, "None of you guys are going to come after me with a weapon." There are Big Ten fan bases that will go after their coaches and teams with weapons, I think, at least a handful. So
which one comes to mind first?
Either Illinois or Indiana.
Yeah, I was going to say Indiana storming Assembly Hall. It seemed very...
Yeah. Sneaky Maryland, too. Maybe not so sneaky, but I think Maryland would as well. But we'll get to Maryland and how I feel like I'm the only realistic Maryland fan left in existence, but we'll talk about that. Okay. So, all right. Good preliminary talk. We're going to go through each of these 18 teams, give our thoughts on each of them entering the season. Keep in mind, this is not meant to be like an exhaustive preview, although for some teams it will certainly feel that way, but more just our preliminary thoughts. And then as we go through the season, some of these teams will definitely come up in a little more detail. So we'll go through in the order of finish last year, and then we'll hit the newcomers. So the Purdue Boilermakers for our first preview, the national runners-up last year. Obviously the big story, no more Zach Edey, two-time National Player of the Year, one of the most dominant college basketball players we have seen. Also no more Lance Jones, Mason Gillis transferred to Duke. So those are some of the key contributors who are gone. Bring back Braden Smith, the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year, as well as Fletcher Lawyer, Cam Heide, and a number of other players from last year's Big Ten champion team. So, Alex, what do you see as kind of the key for Purdue and Matt Painter to build off of what they did last season in the post-Zach Edey era?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's obviously who emerges in that front court, and so I think the presumption is that it's going to be Trey Kaufman-Wren, and there's no reason to not think it's going to be him. Mm-hmm. I'm fascinated to see whether they go two bigs or play a little bit more of a 4-out look and have TKO on the block. I think either could work. It's just kind of picking your poison a little bit for Painter, and he's a wizard with the X's and O's, and he will, I'm sure, figure that out. I know we've talked about it before, but at this point you just have to give him the benefit of the doubt. I pulled up the stat, and I wanted to ask you. He's entering. This is Paint's 20th season in West Lafayette. How many times has he finished below 500 in his tenure?
500 overall or 500 in conference play?
500 in conference play.
Okay.
Below 500. Yep.
I'm going to say he's above 500. Is it at or above 500?
Or below 500 is easier because that's the number I have in my head.
Below 500, we'll go like 5 times.
4.
Okay.
And only once in the last 10 seasons. So and I don't think anyone's looking at this roster and thinking that this team is going to be hovering around 10-10.
Yeah.
But just to say his sustained dominance in this conference, to me they're the clear number one. I know there are going to be arguments for other teams that we're going to talk about. Mm-hmm. The other point I would have is I'm fascinated. There's been so much Jakari Harris buzz that I'm fascinated to see what maybe like a Smith-Harris Lawyer combination looks like, and then do you go big with TKR and maybe Jacobson? I don't really think Berg is going to be in that rotation. I think if anything they probably go to Caleb first. Mm-hmm. That's just my hunch, but yeah, this team's deep. The development of Colvin and Heide is going to be fun to watch. But yeah, I'm really excited to see Harris because he has the body, he has the shooting, he should be able to step right in and be able to compete in the Big Ten. And it's not like you're asking him to be some 12 points per game scorer and tack on 4 assists too as like your lead guard. Like he can mm-hmm. probably fill in that Lance Jones role a little bit if they need. So yeah, a lot to like about this roster.
Yeah, I agree. I think this will be one of the better teams in the Big Ten for sure. Looking at what they'll be after Zach Edey, I think is really interesting because Braden Smith tabbed as the Big Ten's preseason player of the year, as we mentioned. There's some people who are really pushing back on that idea and saying, like, this guy is a Zach Edey merchant, for lack of a better word. There are other people, and I think Joe Jackson is one of them, who's saying, like, no, Braden Smith is fully capable of leading this team. I know the Sleepers guys are really high on him as well. And to Braden Smith's credit, he is a fantastic guard who the growth that he showed from his freshman year to his sophomore year was incredible. And I think he is just a true floor general, a guy who can really score the ball, and he just has that dog in him. So Joe Jackson, who I mentioned, he posted the stat that I wanted to talk about because I'm very interested by this. Braden Smith's per 40-minute stats last year. With Edey on the floor, 13.9 points, 9.3 assists, 6.8 boards, 43% from 3, 45% from 2. With Edey off the floor, 163 minutes, 15.7 points, 5.6 assists, 6.9 rebounds, 43.8 from 3, and 41.7 from 2. Just going to show he is still very effective with Zach Edey off the floor. However, here's what I've been thinking about in regards to the Braden Smith non-Zach Edey minutes, right? And it's only 163 minutes total, so maybe there is the question of sort of a small sample size there. But I'm calling this change-up theory. I've been watching a lot of playoff baseball lately, and it's great with the college basketball offseason. I just watch a lot of baseball, and I love it. So having Zach Edey, just a physically dominant, generational big man, is the equivalent to me of having a 105-mile-an-hour fastball. Teams are game planning for the 105-mile-an-hour fastball. Like, they know that you have that, and all of their preparation is spent, I'm trying to time up the 105-mile-an-hour fastball. Like, that is what I have to worry about. And Zach Edey, to his credit, didn't foul very much. I don't know if you want to credit him or the refs for that or what, but he was, always on the floor for Purdue, right? Which is part of why we have this small sample size with Braden Smith. To me, the Braden Smith non-Zach Edey minutes are the change-up to the 105-mile-an-hour fastball, where I don't think opponents really spent the amount of time that you would think, preparing for the moments when Zach Edey isn't on the floor. Because I just don't think you could afford to do that with Purdue. So that's where I would push back a little bit, because when you have a guy like Zach Edey, he's catching the double in the post every single time. And that opens guys up on the perimeter somewhere, right? And Purdue is a fantastic three-point shooting team last year, in part because they had good shooters, but also because somebody was pretty much always open. Braden Smith's a guy who can find guys on the perimeter. Zach Edey improved as a passer out of the post, and he's a guy who can find guys on the perimeter as well. And so it really worked to Purdue's benefit. Plus, in the pick-and-roll game, you have Zach Edey just setting earth-shattering screens, where Braden Smith is certainly the benefactor of that. So I think that loss of such a gravitational force, I'm not just going to sit here and say that it doesn't make a big difference because Braden Smith was good when Zach Edey wasn't on the floor last time. Because I really don't think that's what opponents cared about at all. I really don't think they were prepping for that.
Yeah, I agree. I guess I'd be interested, or I think I'd be hard pressed to find people who are evaluating this Purdue team and aren't taking into effect Edey's gravity on both ends of the floor. I guess where I'm at with Smith, like you said, so many teams were sending the post doubles, unless you're UConn, in which Donovan Clinton was basically, give me the one-on-one, and then UConn's guards and wings just essentially took Purdue's perimeter contingent out of the game, and that allowed UConn to roll to a 15-point victory in the national title game like that. So I hear what you're saying. I just think Smith is the best table-setting guard in the country and I trust Painter and Thompson's X's and O's to kind of get it done even with Edey not there, because I don't think it's going to be for a lack of weapons. Unproven weapons, sure, but I think just returning Smith and Lawyer, you get TKR, everyone that watches basketball that I consider to be incredible at evaluating this game is basically TKR is the breakout guy. So I think there's something to be said just about, even when you lose the two-time runaway national player of the year, top, 5-10 player in the sports history, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, and I think I just talked in circles for a bit.
Well, for a lesser coach, I would be really worried about the team. But Matt Painter, the guy's a savant, and I've listened to former Big Ten players on podcasts who are he has plans A, B, C, D, E. He's so difficult to try and prepare for as a coach. Braden Smith, so I don't want to say that he's not deserving of Big Ten preseason player of the year, and I think he very well could come away with the award at the end of the season because that's how good of a player he is. But there is still something to be said for the fact that Zach Edey was the first guy, the second guy, and the third guy on every team's scouting report last year. And so there's going to be a lot more attention focused on Braden Smith. they're going to need guys like TKR and Fletcher Lure to step into bigger roles, because when you can just default to, like, let's dump it off to Zach Edey, that makes everybody's job so much easier. And so I think a lot more is going to be asked of some of these guys this season than it was last year. And then you get into guys like Cam Heide or Miles Colvin, where if one of them, kind of breaks out and is a real factor for this team, then yeah, I think Purdue will be just fine. I just wonder, I think there's absolutely enough here to say, like, yeah, Purdue's in the top tier of the Big Ten once again this season. But I do wonder from a national perspective what Purdue's ceiling really is without Zach Edey, And maybe that remains to be seen. But I'm a little skeptical that they will prove to be one of the nation's elite teams. But I think within the Big Ten, absolutely, they'll be fine. All right, next up, the number 2 team in the Big Ten last season. Let's go to Illinois. So Illinois made the Elite Eight last year before getting UConn, which is no shame in that. Everybody got UConn last year. They made it work without a true point guard in the mix. They were able to play Marcus Damascus ball and just kind of give the ball to all these dynamic wings who made it work. And they were a very good team that I think a lot of people picked to make the Final Four if it wasn't for UConn. They lose Terrence Shannon, they lose Coleman Hawkins, they lose Marcus Damascus, they lose Dane Danger, they lose Quincy Guerrier, they lose Luke Goody and Sincere Harris. I mean, pretty much the whole team from last year. They only returned Ty Rodgers as far as starters are concerned. But they still gain a solid amount of talent. Kellen Boswell from Arizona, Kasparis Jakushonis, the Lithuanian freshman who a lot of people are very high on, and I think I might be drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit there too. Ben Hamrickhouse from Evansville. You got Ivasic coming in, and Will Riley, the 5-star. So still, even with all the talent they lost, this is still a very talented Illinois team. I think they have a really high offensive ceiling, especially if a guy like Jackie Shonis lives up to the hype. Then, I think they'll be off to the races. The big question I have for Illinois is Brad Underwood has already been very vocal about how much he hates their defense. He said a 7th grade team would put up 100 points on us, and they did lose a ton of defensive versatility with the departure of Coleman Hawkins. So I think Illinois' upside is certainly there to potentially win the Big Ten. I think there's definitely a shot, but the floor is maybe a little bit lower than some of these other top-tier Big Ten teams just because of the defensive concerns. So I don't know what your perspective is on Illinois. I went back and forth a little bit on them because I just don't really know what the formula is for success, even with a lot of these offensive pieces that they brought in. Because they actually do, like Kellen Boswell, I don't know if you want to go true point guard with Kellen Boswell, but he's certainly more of a point guard than they ever had last season. So,
yeah, your comment about that Underwood made it Big Ten Media Days has me thinking about Greg Waddell's tweet that Painter and Underwood can just get on the mic at Big Ten Media Days because they know they own the conference and can just say whatever they want. And so, I really. Oh gosh, I understand the defensive concerns, but I don't know. There's so much like positional versatility, especially when you add like Morez Johnson into that front court. That man, it's hard not to think that like the pieces will kind of coalesce and figure it out a little bit on that end. Maybe they're not ready in November, and Underwood is right, but they could also just opt to outscore everybody. That could be fun. I too am drinking the Kasparis Jakushonis Kool-Aid. So I'm right there with you, and it seems like everybody else. You give kind of you give Underwood these kind of 6'5", 6'6", like guard wings that he can just kind of throw the ball to and let create and score and be the focal point of their offense, and you know it's kind of going to work. So I don't like the mold's there. We've seen Underwood do it before. My big concern is is this what's the vibes of this team? Is this like the Matthew Mayer kind of team, or are we gonna get we're gonna kind of get last year where they all like each other and everything is all swell and champagne.
I feel so bad for Matthew Mayer that that Illinois team is like known as the Matthew Mayer team.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say, man. It is what it is. I really like this roster, and it's hard for me not to like buy into Underwood taking all this talent and kind of figuring it out at this point. I really like the Boswell ad. I think a return home is going to do good things for him, especially playing in an Underwood offense. I don't know. Did Ivisic get cleared by the NCAA, or is that still an issue? Do you know?
That's a good question. He could be one of those guys that caught like a 1-game suspension or something at the beginning of the season.
Okay.
I'll look that up, and you can keep talking.
Anyway, I know that was an issue or that's become an issue with Igor Demon at BYU. But yeah, I think that I like the Trey Wright ad. I really like the Kerry Booth ad from Notre Dame. Will Riley, it's hard not to. Will Riley, I find hard like assessing because we've seen how reclassifying up a year to play early has gone for a lot of freshmen. And at his frame, I guess I'm a little concerned, but it's also hard not to just see the tape, especially from him in the EYBL, and the way he can just absolutely pour it in and not just immediately get bought in. I don't know. It's a good, like, their top 10 is really good. It's uber talented. I wait and see what Underwood can finally do with it, I guess.
Sure. So to the Ivisic point, as of 3-4 days ago, not currently cleared by the NCAA.
So Perez Johnson starting at the 5, right?
I mean, I guess, yeah. It's without Ivisic, it's pretty much a small ball type of team.
Which could work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ty Rogers guarding a 5, guarding the opposing team's 5. Soon come.
Yeah, I mean, the Dane Danger minutes at the 5 last year were a good time.
They were awesome.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Danger Zone.
Welcome to the Danger Zone. Love the Danger Zone. So what do you think the ceiling and the floor, like what, actually I'll ask this a different way. What do you think a successful season for Illinois would be, especially given all of the new pieces that they've added?
I think at Illinois, the expectation, I don't know. It's hard for me to not also think that expectation blends into the success aspect a little bit. So I think at this point it's a second weekend appearance. Like, that's just what Illinois, that fan base expects.
Sure.
The floor feels NCAA tournament appearance to me. I think it would be hard for me to envision a world where they don't make it. I mean, I guess it could fall apart, but even then I think they would get a nod as like a 9 or a 10. So,
right. Yeah, I agree with you. Like,
Elite 8, yeah.
Underwood has a bunch of guys who fit what he wants to do. And so it's hard for me to look at that and say this is a team that's going to miss the tournament. I actually do want to see. I should have checked this beforehand. I mean, Illinois was 80th in defensive efficiency last year per Ken Pom. And that was an Elite 8 team. So it's not that, like, obviously you want the defense to be there, but Brad Underwood literally just showed us that he can take teams deep even without, like, lockdown defense. Like, if they're a top 100 defense, then I think they'll be fine. And I guess that's relative because, like, it falls outside the Ken Pom thresholds or whatever, but I think they'll be fine. They'll just outscore everybody. All right, moving on. The number 3 team in the Big Ten last year, Nebraska. Nebraska ball made the tournament. I was not necessarily a Nebraska respecter last season. I frequently described them as a power of friendship team, and I think I stand by that because it's not like they did anything once they made the tournament. They lose Keisei Tominaga, sharpshooter. I think the rest of the Big Ten is very happy that he is no longer in the conference. C.J. Wilcher, Josiah Illick, and Ringmast is out for the season after off-season surgery, which is definitely a blow to this Nebraska team. Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary are back. They add Gavin Griffiths from Rutgers and Connor Essegian from Wisconsin. So a little bit of a who's who of Big Ten players here. Plus Aaron Eulis will play after not playing last season. So it really is just a hodgepodge of players from other Big Ten teams. Alex, talk to me about Nebraska. What do you envision here for this interesting collection of players?
I'm kind of fascinated to see how Hoiberg runs that offense through, because they did it with Rink Mass last year. I believe they did it some, if memory serves me right, with Derek Walker when he was kind of at that 5. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like duos in the conference, Williams and Gary are probably up there, just in terms of what they kind of provide on both ends. The stock couldn't be lower for Essegian and Gavin Griffiths, but they're both good shooters. Like, can Essegian get back any of the confidence he had his freshman year at Wisconsin? Like, it was gone last year. He couldn't get on the floor. But yeah, man, I really don't know. I was struggling with this because I do feel, I mean, again, people are already saying it, but the outlook for this team is totally different if Rink Mass is on the floor. Like, the conversation probably changes to back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances. Can they get the program's first ever win in the Big Dance? Like, so, yeah, I think they're probably in the basement of this conference, but that doesn't mean they won't be competitive. You know, like, this Hoiberg will have them right there in the thick of games, and I don't think anyone's going to want to go play in Lincoln. So, can't imagine seeing that a couple years ago either.
I will say to Connor Essegian, I think he won the breakup here.
Really?
I think I'm a little bit higher on Nebraska than I am on Wisconsin. I mean, we'll talk about Wisconsin, but and he might even start. Like, who's to say? Because it looks like it'll probably be – they have Raleigh Worcester coming in. He's the transfer from Utah. 6'5", senior point guard, played 31 minutes a game last year. Not really a scorer, not super efficient, but more of like a table setter. He averaged 5.5 assists per game last year, so they'll absolutely take that. Then you have Williams and Gary in the starting lineup. Probably one of Griffiths or Essegian, if I had to guess. Yeah. And then they'll have Braxton Mia come in from Washington, who was sort of in a reserve type, not really reserve type role, but just like came off the bench, 17 minutes a game. Gave Washington 5 and 5. But he's 7'1", and that's kind of what you need in the Big Ten, is just a guy who's 7'1". So, yeah, it's an interesting team. I'm not crazy high on them. I don't think the ceiling is super high. But Williams and Gary will kind of do their thing. And there's a chance, like, they surprised last year. Maybe they go, like, 8-12 in the Big Ten this year. And it's like, that's probably better than if you just, like, ask me point blank. I don't know that I'd predict them to win 8 games in the Big Ten, but that's definitely within the realm of possibility. Like, win 8 or 9 games and kind of be in that, like, middle of the pack, just the giant blob that forms from, like, 6 to 12 in the conference. Totally possible. And they have guys who, like, can definitely make that happen. They have shooters, too, so, yeah. I don't know. It will be an interesting season, I think, for Nebraska. Sort of we talked in the ACC about just some of these spoiler teams. They, to me, might be one of those, like, spoiler teams where they just completely wreck other teams' seasons. But as far as Nebraska in and of themselves, I'm not really expecting them to do much. I don't think they make the tournament, so we'll see. I forget what tier I put them in, but we'll see at the end of the episode. So, yeah, that's Nebraska. All right, next up, number 4, the Northwestern Wildcats. In my notes, I just have let Alex take this one. So, Alex, I'm giving you the floor. Please cook for us.
My beloved cat. The man, I mean, what a 2 years for this program. Back-to-back NCAA tournament appearances, neither of which I don't think anyone saw coming. I definitely know we did not envision them making the tournament last season. I think I
I
said
don't
I
think
would
we
be happy.
did.
I believe, and I think I find myself saying it again this year, but I believe last year I said something to the effect of, "Oh, I'd be happy with an NIT bid." Like that's good given this program's history. Again, I can't say enough about just and the defense wasn't as good as it was in the 2023 season, but just the job Chris Lowry has done on that staff. The big storyline this year is just Boo Booey's gone. Your offensive cornerstone, the team's alpha. I mean, I know Northwestern fans argue about whether he's the greatest player in program history. I know a lot of people outside of it would say just build the statue now, hang the rafter. No one should ever wear 0 again. Hang the jersey, but yeah, it's tough. Like it's a team that shot 30, I believe 39% from 3 last year. That was top 10 in the country. You lose Ryan Langborg. Obviously, talked about losing Bowie. It's interesting because you kind of you saw the team you saw them like crawl into the NCAA tournament without Barry. Nicholson was hurt. Like I mean, there was no reason that team should have been playing FAU, but they were, and so the main storyline this season is, I mean, that offense was so reliant on kind of just, we talked about Zach Edey's gravity, but there's definitely not another program in the Big Ten replacing like a bigger piece than Northwestern and Boo Booey besides Purdue probably.
Maryland, but continue.
Maryland, okay. Maryland can join that conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know my favorite thing I'm looking forward to this season is watching Brooks Barnheiser booty ball. I really hope they lean into that and just kind of run the offense through him with kind of Barry and Leach off ball, just running around, the bevy of back screens that they will set for shooters. I'm extremely high on KJ Wyndham being able to produce as a freshman. I think I heard from somebody close to the program say that he is the team's best shooter, so I will lean into that heavily. You get Ty Berry back. Matt Nicholson is one of the better rim protecting bigs in the conference. Yeah, it is an incredibly unproven team outside of that kind of big three of Barnheiser, Berry, and Nicholson. Can Leach go from Fairfield to the Big Ten and make that transition? Because I think Northwestern is going to need him to average like 12 a game. Are the Cats going to see more from Luke Hunger? Does Keenan Fitzmaurice eat into those minutes at all at center? I don't really know. Can Justin Mullins provide something after kind of just being lost in his first season in the Big Ten after transferring from Denver? So there are a lot of questions. The main one, the one people are going to be harping on all season is how do you replace Boo Booey? I don't really know. The answer seems to be that, and I do think that Brooks Barnheiser can be an effective one. I know a lot of people have doubts about that. And maybe it's because I've watched them so much, and it's hard not to get a little positive about your program. But I do not think this team is going to be one that craters, especially in a conference where so many coaches are trying to integrate so many new pieces. I do think that consistency, I think Joe Jackson posted a graphic where Northwestern has returned the most minutes in the Big Ten. I think it's around 63%. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But, yeah, this has kind of been a long-winded thing to say that I think this is probably a middle of the pack toward lower end of the Big Ten team, but one that, again, in such a team that's in such a conference that's just parity-ridden and asking for somebody pegged to finish in like the bottom four to once again finish in the top 6. I do think Northwestern probably fits that billing. So, please tell me why I'm wrong.
I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I mean, I think the answer to the question, how do you replace Boo Buie, is just you can't. So you got to find other options. And I think Brooks Barnhizer, he showed enough last season that I feel pretty confident that he can be a one for them this season. They will need Jalen Leach to provide some semblance of just something playing the one.
Yeah.
But there's enough, to your point, like, I like I guess I'll call it the spine of what Northwestern has here. Like, I think there's enough structure with what they have returning that Chris Collins can make something out of it. Now, what that something is, I don't know. Most people have this team pegged as like a seller of the Big Ten type of team. I wouldn't necessarily go that far because I think there's enough here. But to kind of hit that upper end outcome, you need Leach to do something. You need somebody outside of, like, some bench piece to be to prove to be like a legit contributor, because that's the other problem I could see facing this team, is just the depth is not necessarily there on paper. So I think defensively they'll be fine. Offensively, we'll see what it looks like. I think Brooks Barnhizer booty ball would be very, very fun, and I do hope that is what Collins ends up going with, especially because, yeah, it might take some time for Leach to feel his way through the Big Ten. So I see the vision with Northwestern.
I can't believe I forgot to mention the one and only Nick Martinelli, who seemingly,
of course,
opponents don't read the scouting report that their coaches lay out to, because that guy only gets to his left hand, and yet he can always do it. Whether he's driving left or right, he will get turned back over his shoulder and just literally plop the float. It's kind of inexplicable. It truly is an art form, the way he's just able to, like, lift shots over flailing 6'10" to 7'1" centers in this conference, just amid a melee of bodies and in the paint. But yeah, I don't know. I do think the lineup, and again, Chris Collins from the Coach K tree, running with the short rotation. Barnhizer and Barry each logged, I think, 36 plus minutes last year when they were both healthy. Like, I think that's the expectation again, unless this team is truly deeper than I think they are. And so, I do think the center spot is going to be a little more rotation based, but yeah.
Sure. All right, great. That's Northwestern. Next up, number 5, we have the Wisconsin Badgers, who made the tournament last year, lost in the round of 64 to the upstart mid-major James Madison. Wisconsin enters this season losing 3 of their top 5 scorers from last year. A.J. Storr transfers to Kansas. Tyler Wall is, I believe, out of eligibility, and Chucky Hepburn transferred to Louisville. So they bring back Klesmit and Stephen Crowell, so that's good, and they'll have big roles for this team this season. They bring back John Blackwell. He was, with kind of Storr's emergence, Blackwell didn't have, the greatest impact on this team last year, but he's a candidate for maybe some type of sophomore breakout, I think. 8 points a game last year, hit 45% of his threes, so that's not nothing. They bring in Cameron Hunter from Central Arkansas, who didn't play last season because of injury, but the year before averaged 16.9 points a game, almost 4 assists. Pretty good guy with the ball in his hands, at least based on what we've seen most recently. But, yeah, the big question with him is just what does he look like coming off of an injury. And they have Xavier Amos, who comes in from Northern Illinois, averaged almost 14 points a game for Northern Illinois last season. This team is objectively less talented than they were last year, I think. I think that's completely fair to say. However, I keep thinking about this tweet that I saw, and this was a couple years ago now, but I think it's perfectly descriptive of the Greg Gard Wisconsin era, which he is entering his 10th season in charge. So congrats on a decade, Greg Gard. Then the tweet was, I've understood maybe 25% of Wisconsin wins over the last decade. It's like, yeah, like Wisconsin no matter what they look like on paper, always just wins these stupid games that you don't really understand how they won. This is another team that I've seen a lot of people peg as like a seller team in the Big Ten. But there's a chance with all the parity that they just get a bunch of stupid wins that you don't really understand how they managed to walk away with them. Their defensive system, it didn't quite work last season to the degree that it usually has under guard, but a lot of it is predicated on fouling opposing players in a way that the refs can't determine that it was a foul, which is extremely frustrating to play against. And it didn't really work to its full effect last year, but I'm sure we can expect that will be once again a feature part of this Wisconsin team. So Alex, you spent some time in Wisconsin. What do you think about the Badgers this year?
I really like Blackwell. Like I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do think he can emerge as the guy on this team. It's just what he is last year, and again, like you said, just Storr's emergence. He had a hip injury kind of midway through the season, and I think kind of hobbled him a little bit. It was just riddled with inconsistency. Like I pulled up his game log because my memory was a little bit foggy, but I thought he was right. So he closed the game in the final 4 games of Wisconsin's season. He made 1 shot, but right preceding that 4-game spurt, he poured in 9, 11, 7, 17, 18, 18 in 6 games before. Now wait, I'll read to you the games before those. It was 2, 5, 3, 5, 3, 4. That's just a glimpse into kind of like the back half of his season. His season was essentially broken into like 5 or 6 just like incredible highs and lows. And so, again, if you want him to kind of stay at that level, I think that's the big question Greg Gard is asking himself. I guess I was going to ask you, reports are that Cam Hunter might not be the starting point guard, that it might go to Kamari McGee, that it might even be Daniel Freitag, the freshman. Is that conducive to Wisconsin's success, or is that like an indictment of both the transfer because early indications are maybe these 3 transfers that Gard is talking pretty openly about Wisconsin's NIL situation, that they can't compete, that he needed to kind of, I believe he said something to the effect of, in an Athletic article, that he had to kind of approach it from a almost like NBA GM roster construction, looking for like 3 specific archetypes of players. What does it say that if Tanjay and Hunter and Amos like aren't the respective guys at their positions? What do you think that means for Wisconsin's season?
I already don't think their ceiling is particularly high as it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know that's probably those are the swing pieces for them to hit their ceiling. But I think this team still will revolve around Klesmit, Blackwell, and Crowell, the guys who are returning. I don't think overall it's a particularly deep team. I don't think it's a particularly talented team on paper. But like I said, I think they'll win stupid games. And Cam Hunter coming off of injury was always kind of this wild card. It's like we know what he did at Central Arkansas 2 years ago, but coming into the Big Ten, it's a different beast. It's similar to the Leach thing with Northwestern. It's like, what is he going to be if we're asking him to play the 1? Because, I mean, Freitag's coming in as a freshman, so, you can go into that whole thing about starting a true freshman at point guard. At least Kamari McGee has experience, like at least that can be said for what he brings to the table. It's definitely not great if none of these transfers work out. It's also only a transfer class of 3 guys.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just, as far as depth goes, it's like they don't have a whole lot of options otherwise if these guys don't work out. I just think it's not the type of year where it's like, wow, Wisconsin was a huge disappointment because their transfers from Northern Illinois and Central Arkansas didn't work out. It's like, if those are the guys that you're really relying on to make this like a competitive season for your team, you're probably not going to have a great season to begin with. So I don't expect a whole lot from Wisconsin, but I do expect it to be just full Greg Gard, ugly win after ugly win, and we'll look up and they'll be another one of these teams that somehow won 8-9 games in Big Ten play along with everybody else, and that will kind of be Wisconsin's season. But I don't think they're a tournament team. I kind of went back and forth on which tier to put them in, just given what I know of Greg Gard and knowing what I know about the guys who they're bringing back. But overall, I don't really expect a whole lot from Wisconsin. So there's that. Okay, number 6, the Indiana Hoosiers. The Indiana Hoosiers. I'm a documented hater of Indiana basketball because I tell the truth about Indiana basketball. If that makes me a hater, so be it. Bottom line, I think this is a make-or-break year for Mike Woodson. Last year, missing the tournament, definitely did not meet expectations there. And objectively, I'll say it, this roster is very talented. Like, they should make the tournament this year. Won the portal early, got Miles Rice in, Umar Ballo, Cannon Carlisle, Luke Goody, bringing back an experienced guy in Galloway. Mackenzie Mbako's back, and he was not a player that going into his freshman season anybody thought he was going to be there for multiple seasons. So that's a huge opportunity for them, especially if he can kind of get his shot right for this season. Malik Renaud, who averaged 15 points a game last year and was excellent in that kind of two big lineup of Renaud and Kellel Ware. Like I said, I think this is a really good team. The thing that will ultimately hold them back is Mike Woodson. And the common trope that I see is like, well, Woodson's like getting guys to the NBA, and they'll cite like Jalen Hood-Schifino and Kellel Ware, and it's like, that's not like his primary job, you understand. His primary job is to win Big Ten games and to like get banners for Indiana. It's not to be, he can be a great developer all he wants, but his job, he doesn't work for the NBA. He works for Indiana. So like his job is to make things happen with the roster that he has. It's not, if guys develop along the way, fantastic, but that's like a side thing. That's not his primary job. And the fact of the matter is, he has not lived up to the expectations, fair or unfair, that Indiana fans and I think the general college basketball media landscape has set for the Hoosiers. So he's going into year 4. They should make the tournament. I think they're good enough to win a game, multiple games in the tournament based on what they have on paper. But if they don't, the conversations will need to be had. That's all I'll say. The one thing I'll say about just like on-court stuff, I'm not super concerned about like the Ballo and Renaud fit because I think they showed they can make the two big thing work last year. And part of that as well was because they had to. The guard situation was miserable for Indiana last season because Xavier Johnson was hurt, and then when he played, he wasn't very good. They were asking Trey Galloway to play the 1, which was just ridiculous. It just didn't work. But now you have a guy in Miles Rice who averaged 15 points a game last year. He's a table setter. He's a guy who, like, in the pick and roll, he's going to be fantastic for them. Trey Galloway can now slide into a role that I think is much more conducive to his skill set. Plus, you have guys like Mbako and Renaud back. I see the vision with this team. One of the big problems they had last year was they could not shoot at all. And Mike Woodson's solution to that was just, okay, let's just never take a three-pointer again, which I don't think is the greatest strategy to just completely remove that from your team's gameplay. But, like, did he fix it? Like, I don't know, because they brought in guys who will shoot more, but I saw the stat that the current roster that Indiana has together shot the same percentage that last year's team did. It was just on more attempts. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. Like, you have more guys willing to shoot, but if they're shooting the same percentage, then it's like, what's the point? And if Mike Woodson doesn't let them take threes, then again, what's the point? So make or break here for Mike Woodson. That is what I'll say. I'm just naturally an Indiana pessimist, I'll say it. What's your vision for Indiana? Is this the year that Mike Woodson finally like figures it out, or is it like Indiana's just going to disappoint again?
I don't know if Mike Woodson figures it out as much as Indiana's NIL and athletic department has granted him such a talented roster that he will just win anyway, in spite of maybe the coaching critiques you have levied against him in the last 4.5 minutes and consistently the last couple of years. So I do think this roster is so talented, it's just whether he finished these last couple of years. You touched on it, but in terms of 3-point rate, they were 351st and 354th in the last 2 seasons, according to KenPom. They were not putting them up. So I do think the fact, even if Miles Rice or Carlisle are not elite shooters, nor is Galloway, I do think the fact that the first two put them up is a good thing. And you can have Luke Goody on the floor to space it out. And Baco, for all his critiques in high school about his jumper, that was hit or miss, he did shoot 38% from 3 in Big Ten play last season. So I think there's enough of a sample size there to say it probably translates into year 2.
Mm-hmm.
Is Oumar Ballo being underrated at all in terms of him just being an asset for this front court? It does feel like it feels like if anyone had a chance to maybe knock Braden Smith off the preseason Player of the Year pedestal, it was him, and I don't think he even got much recognition or thought for that. I don't know. Maybe I do believe he was first team All Big Ten in most preseason projections, so I think that right there shows that he isn't that people expect him to. It just doesn't feel like the hype train is there for him so much as it is with a bunch of other pieces on this roster, which I find interesting for a guy that's a nightly 13 or 14 and 10,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right. Yeah, Ballo is an interesting case because I think he was almost universally lauded as the best, one of the 2 or 3 best incoming transfers in the country.
Yeah.
And I think just based on what he's done at Arizona, especially, he probably is the best player on this roster, I think. But it's, again, there's so many guys who that could end up being by the end of the season. It's a really good problem to have, actually, where they have just so many guys who are individually talented that, maybe Mackenzie Mbako just goes off and ends up being the best player by season's end, right? Because his overall percentage wasn't altogether promising, but he did shoot 38% in Big Ten play because he just had such an awful, awful start to last year shooting the ball, but then came around by the time that it really was going to make a difference.
I don't know. This team is so talented that I almost think Woodson's previous dilemmas, shortcomings on the sidelines, whatever you want to call it, won't matter. He could kind of just throw out 5 guys out there so long as it isn't Gabe Cups and this team won games.
I think a success for this Indiana team is there's one of 2 options, I think. I think you either win the Big Ten outright or make the Sweet 16.
You can't have both?
Do you think that's real? They could totally do both, but I think if they do any one of them, that would be a success for me.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Indiana winning the Big Ten and just lording that over Purdue is a given, even with Purdue coming off a national title appearance. That.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all Indiana fans could ask for, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
Besides a Final Four appearance. Which
Sure.
I can't.
Yeah. And I think it's good that this team isn't coming in with outlandish expectations. It seems like a lot of preseason polls are actually lower on them than I expected, honestly, given what they have on paper. So I think it's actually a good thing for Indiana, to be completely honest, because the last couple of years, especially the back half of Trace Jackson Davis's career, they were getting legitimate Final Four hype. And people act like that didn't happen because it ended up not happening. But it's if you go back and you look, there were a lot of people who were Indiana's a Final Four team. So we'll see. This year the roster is just too good. I think they absolutely make the tournament. They could win the Big Ten. And if they don't, then we'll have that conversation. But for right now, I expect them to be a very good team. So that's Indiana. All right, next up. I'm interested by this one. The number 7 team in the Big Ten last year, the Iowa Hawkeyes. The Iowa Hawkeyes. Alex, what do you envision for this Iowa team? I'll have you go first. They're a team I went back and forth on, admittedly, so I'd like to hear your thoughts before I launch into it, because I really don't know what direction I'm going to go.
I mean, I don't either. Can I be so honest with you? Yay, Peyton Sanford's back. Owen Freeman's back. Like that. It's another good duo on a kind of team that is projected to once again be middling. Is Fran McCaffrey on retirement watch? I guess that would be my... Or the hot seat? No, I don't know if he's on the hot seat.
Probably not.
Retirement watch? Like, his kids are no longer in the program. I think that could be an indication of the times are changing for the Hawkeyes. But,
true. It might depend how this season goes, to be honest.
Yeah. So much as Purdue is a given as kind of the creme de la creme of the conference at this point, Iowa's offense is going to be awesome. Its defense is not going to be that. And I think that's, again, the case this year. They are an offensive juggernaut. It's awesome to watch. I feel like Josh Dix is somebody that could be another kind of breakout candidate. I know what did he average last year? Like 9 a game? 9 a game, and I think he shot like 40-something% from 3. I really didn't know what to make of it because we know what Peyton Sanford and Owen Freeman are, just in terms of their quality individually, and Iowa's offense is what it is, and its defense is the same. I do think like losing Tony Perkins as a point of attack defender will hurt them a lot. I don't know who replaces them as that type of guy. This feels like one of those teams kind of in that, again, we'll go into how we tiered the conference, but kind of in that maybe 3rd or 4th tier, like they're, I don't know. I could see them. It's like a fringe bubble team, but.
Yeah, I think it's really good that they got Sanford back. Like, that's obviously huge for them, especially considering he was getting legitimate NBA looks and had the option to stay in the draft and then decided to come back. Fran McCaffrey's like almost ahead of his time a little bit because he's kind of built this team around a 6'7" movement shooter, which, to his credit, Peyton Sanford was awesome last year. Like 16 points a game, did some work on the glass as well, almost 7 boards, and shot the lights out. And he's, at least from what I can see on paper, he's going to be the most dangerous shooter in the conference this season. And I'm not sure who else would challenge for that, but just like in my head, that feels like the right pick. Yeah, losing Tony Perkins from a defensive standpoint, not great. I think Seydou Traore, the transfer from Manhattan, can definitely help with that. Really athletic. He did well for Manhattan last year in terms of production, 11 and 8. Also averaged 2.8 stocks per game, 6'7", fairly switchable. So I think he definitely helps with some of those defensive concerns. And then Josh Dix is another guy who can really shoot the rock, 42% from 3 last season. He's going to have a larger role this year. And I think if one of him or Owen Freeman has a legitimate breakout year, we're looking at, like an Iowa team that could definitely make some noise in the Big Ten. But with Peyton Sanford as the feature guy, I just don't know. Like, I think he's going to be awesome, but I just don't know what that looks like in today's Big Ten to have your feature player be, a 6'7" wing that's just like running off screens and stuff. I just don't know what that looks like because that's just not how the rest of the Big Ten plays basketball. So, and last year, like, that's kind of what they did, and they went 10-10 in the conference and didn't make the tournament. So if that's the format again this year, they don't have a guy who's as dynamic as like one of the Murray twins, and they don't have a star like Luka Garza who's just going to dominate down in the paint. Unless, if Owen Freeman really is that guy, then we'll see. I don't see what the upside is. Like, to me, they're just the worst version of Illinois. like worse offensively and worse defensively, which is like not. I don't think that's a great place to be. Illinois can make it work because their offense is going to legitimately be elite, but I don't know that I can say the same for Iowa. At least until we see what Josh Dix and Owen Freeman are made of. But until then, I'm pretty low on Iowa, all things considered. All right, next up, number 8 team in the Big Ten last year. This, we got to move a little bit faster. I think this is crazy. This conference is a complete mess. But we got Michigan State. Tom Izzo's back. They bring back a host of guys from last season's team, including Jaden Akins, Carson Cooper, Jackson Kohler, Cohen Carr, Xavier Booker, Jeremy Fears, et cetera, et cetera. So they lose Tyson Walker, which is not great. That's a big loss for this team. They also lose A.J. Hogard, which I think a lot of Michigan State fans would say is addition by subtraction. So sort of go 1-1 there for your backcourt losses. Jeremy Fears and Jaden Akins will have bigger roles this year. Akins has been there for a good while now. I think he's on, is this year 4 for Jaden Akins?
Yeah, he's a senior.
Yeah, so he's started a bunch of games. He can score, but he was kind of taking a backseat to Tyson Walker, so we'll see how he handles the larger workload. Really good three-point shooter. He's shot almost 40% from 3 in his career, which is fantastic. Fears is interesting, and I think a lot of Michigan State's success will revolve around what Fears looks like. They do bring in Frankie Fiddler, who I think is going to be a really good scorer, but for me, the X factor kind of is Fears. Redshirted last season. I mean, didn't do much in the minutes that he played, but this guy's a playmaker, and he's really athletic, and he can score the ball, but he hasn't gotten the minutes, and he hasn't really proven that over the course of his career. Also, his three-point shot wasn't all that great either. So that kind of hurt what he was able to do for them last season. But as a table setter, I think he's really good. And when you look at some of the other pieces on this Michigan State team, there is a table to be set with Michigan State. Like, I think there's legit pieces here that, we talk about some of these other teams in the Big Ten where it's like, oh, they need such and such guys to break out. I think the same is true for Michigan State, but I'm a lot more confident that some of these guys are actually going to pull that off.
Are you worried about the youth, I guess, or relative inexperience of this roster, given that it lost 4 starters, especially Tyson Walker, who Izzo just frequently just threw the ball to go make a play? I
think some of the inexperience is offset at least a little bit by just how athletic this team is, especially when you look at a front court of Cohen Carr and Xavier Booker. It's like, yeah, dude, I'll take that all day long. And Cohen Carr is the type of guy who, if he can parlay his elite athleticism and like slashing ability into becoming a legit contributor, like he was a flashes guy last year, but I need him to be solid contributor this season. And then I think Michigan State will be really good. And Xavier Booker was in the doghouse for like all of last season. I think I tweeted last year, like, we saw more Steven Izzo highlights than Xavier Booker highlights, and I don't think anybody expected that to be the case. But the pedigree's still there, and his, kind of high outlook coming out of high school is still there. And I think a lot of those tools can show up this year if he gets to have, the minutes at the 5 spot, if Izzo actually allows him to play those minutes. And it's not like they have a ton of other front court options, really. So, like, that's kind of what I'm expecting. Like, are we getting Jackson Kohler, a ton of minutes from Jackson Kohler at the 5? I don't think so.
I was going to ask, I don't know how extended it was, but we did get a glimpse of the Jackson Kohler, Carson Cooper front court in their exhibition scrimmage, whatever you want to call it, against Northern Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be something Izzo toys with, at least early in the season. I'm with you. This team is so hyper athletic, and kind of the backcourt, at least the starting backcourt trio, I think of, there's a lot to like there with Fears, Holloman, and Akins. It's just kind of, can Akins become the guy everyone's kind of projected him to be in the previous 2 seasons?
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, though, I guess I don't this team finds its greatest success with Xavier Booker on the floor, I feel like, and maybe some Michigan State fans feel otherwise, but I just, how many minutes is Izzo going to give both Kohler and Cooper, I guess would be my, like, what does the center rotation specifically look like?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really like Cohen Carr at the 4, so.
Yeah, me too.
Hopefully that they lean into that a little bit. Yeah, I like the roster. Like, I think, again, like, Michigan State has made 26 consecutive NCAA tournament appearances. The flip side of that is they've lost more than 13 games in each of the last 4 seasons. 13 or more games. So it's like, still going dancing, but not to the level, I think, of the 2010s when you made a handful of Final Fours. And obviously Michigan State was the most recent team to
and like when you're getting in on that 8-9 line, you're immediately throwing your team into a 50-50, and then you have to go up against a 1 seed. And so it's like you want to see Michigan State hit one of these higher seed lines. And they try to do it with their non-conference schedule every year, and so that kind of accounts for some of the losses that they pick up is because they're playing a tough schedule.
Yep.
I just don't think Izzo can afford to mess around with the front court this year because it was, I mean, the lack of rebounding last year felt like it was going to completely destroy this team, and they still managed to make the tournament, to their credit. But that was such an issue that was like harped on all the time by Michigan State fans, where it's like none of these guys can get a rebound. Like Matty Sissoko's gone, right? Like we see how that worked out, and Xavier Booker never played. So now it's like, okay, is he gonna be the starting 5 this year, or are we gonna keep messing around with like Carson Cooper and Jackson Kohler? And what is the plan for the front court? Because I think there's enough questions with the backcourt of who's gonna be that guy in the backcourt to step up, that I don't think you can have the same be true of the front court and not have kind of a rocky season. And Frankie Fiddler, like we haven't talked a lot about Frankie Fiddler, but I feel like we kind of know what he's gonna be. Like he's the scoring wing. Obviously, big jump up in competition going from the Summit League to the Big Ten, and maybe there's some defensive concerns there as well, but totally a capable scorer who we've seen do it before. And with like all of the other question marks on this team for Michigan, like I just don't think he's one of them.
Yeah.
Do you have Michigan State making the tournament?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make it 27. Like it's. Yeah. I think that's almost a guarantee, even with any questions people have.
Yeah, I think a lot of the teams that are in their similar tier, I feel more confident in Michigan State's ability to actually answer the questions that they have versus some of these other teams. And yeah, I think that speaks to the roster and the athleticism and just the potential that a lot of these guys have. So there's Michigan State. Number 9, the Minnesota Gophers, the Golden Gophers. I forgot their team name for a second, but I mean, I don't know that they really deserve it anyway. Not to start out on a downer, but like, is Ben Johnson on the hot seat? I understand they were decent last year, right? Like they finished 9th place in the conference. I think they were better than most people expected them to be, and they return a star in Dawson Garcia, who is, I mean, he's legit. Like he's definitely a matchup problem for pretty much every team in the Big Ten. And he's definitely going to put up numbers again this year, just because of what he can do in the post, in the mid range. He's a problem. After that, though, it gets a little bit dicey. Like Mike Mitchell's a nice role player. I think he averaged 10 points a game last year, and it's a lot of newcomers to this roster who did well at their previous destinations. Like they brought in Tyler Cochran from Toledo, 14 points a game last year. Femi Odekale from New Mexico State, 10 points a game last year. Frank Mitchell from Canisius, 12 points, 11 boards a game. But is that the starting group? Because that's a lot of guys that you need to translate right away. And just the overall talent on the roster, to me, just isn't there. I think they're definitely less talented than they were last year with the losses of Cam Christie, Elijah Hawkins, etc. I don't know that this is going to be a great year for Minnesota. To me, it feels like a Dawson Garcia puts up numbies, and Minnesota is like bottom 4 in the Big Ten.
I'm with you. I don't think Ben Johnson is on the hot seat for what it's worth. I do think that last season gave him a little bit of a runway. Whether or not you think that should be the case is up to the viewer.
I mean, we have the other however many seasons before that, which we have the 3 seasons before or 2 seasons before that, which were not great. So
I don't know.
It's like how many years can you exist in the basement of the conference before change has to be made? You know.
Just ask Chris Collins.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Yeah.
So maybe that's the mold Minnesota's trying to follow. I'm with you. It's weird. For what they added in the transfer portal in terms of kind of increasing or improving the kind of, I guess, defensive pressure or upside within the backcourt, they kind of traded that off for like any of the creation or scoring or shooting that like last year's backcourt had. So it's like we talked about the 1-1 with like Walker and AJ Hoggard for Michigan State. That's kind of what Johnson traded for in the portal this year in the backcourt. And so like,
yeah,
are we really going to ask Dawson Garcia to protect the rim at the 5? History has not shown that to be the case.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, I'm with you. Dawson Garcia putting up like 20 and 9 on this team seems like a lock. Like I think voters at the end of the season are going to wrestle with whether or not they should include him on preseason or postseason ballots because it's like, oh man, look at his counting stats.
Yeah.
Also, Minnesota finished 5-15 in the conference. You know.
Yeah.
So, I don't.
It's going to feel like an empty calories type of year for Dawson Garcia, but I don't think it's his fault. You know, like what is he supposed to do about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm with you. I don't think there's enough talent on the roster. I do think Ben Johnson is pretty safe and maybe a scenario at other schools where he would not be.
Sure. I don't think Minnesota makes the tournament. I think that goes without saying, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Ohio State Buckeyes, one of the more intriguing teams in the conference to me. So Jake Diebler, Chris Holtmann gets fired in the middle of the season last year. Jake Diebler comes in. They finish the year 8-3, get that interim coach bump. He gets the interim tag removed, so he's going into his first official season as the head coach. And they did beat Purdue over that final stretch of the season. So they returned Bruce Thornton, who is a legit star. I think he'll be an all Big Ten first-team type of guy. He averaged 15 and 5. You know, the long-range shooting wasn't necessarily always there, but just a guy who produces, and he's definitely the incumbent as far as, like, number one options go. Physical guard, thrives, getting to the bucket. Like I said, I think he's a legit first-teamer. Around him is where things get really interesting. So Ohio State brings in Michi Johnson, former Ohio State, and then South Carolina, and then now back to Ohio State guard Michi Johnson. He averaged 14 points a game last year. He was really good for South Carolina. Micah Parrish comes in from San Diego State. Sean Stewart from Duke. Aaron Bradshaw from Kentucky. It's a lot of buy low transfer portal additions, but there's a lot of high upside here, I think, with some of these guys, especially Aaron Bradshaw. I think we could really see him break out with Ohio State. It just never really happened for him at Kentucky, but the talent, I think, is definitely there. And again, in the Big Ten, you need a guy who's 7 feet tall. You just do. And he is that. So really interested to see what this team looks like, because I think we know what Bruce Thornton is. To me, there's still, like, I get the potential with this team. I just don't know. I don't know what to expect, because then you throw in the factor of, like, it's Jake Diebler's first season. He has all these pieces who could be good. I've seen plenty of places project that the Buckeyes finish like 6th or 5th in the Big Ten. Feels a little rich for me, but I'm not going to say it's totally out of the realm of possibility if everybody hits. I just don't know that everybody will hit because, again, it's a buy low situation with some of these transfers.
I think the shooting variance regression monster is coming. I think that 8-3 record, they were like so the beneficiary of some positive shooting variance that maybe Chris Holtmann, and I'm not saying that like that team wasn't struggling for some other reasons, but I also don't think that they were aided by just like a cataclysmic shooting start to Big Ten play. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Sean Stewart. I'm fascinated to see how the Stewart Bradshaw pairing in the front court kind of complements one another. Like if Bradshaw's shooting comes along, because Sean Stewart is not going to be letting it fly, I think that really does a lot of things for this offense. And I'm with you. Like I like the backcourt kind of trio that you mentioned of Thornton and Michi and Parrish. So yeah, I don't know. Honestly, part of that, like, this is a bad example because Ohio State flirted with making the NCAA tournament even after a horrid start. But that Purdue win especially felt like when I watched the Panthers pivot away from Bryce Young and then finally win a football game, that's kind of what that felt like. Like, you just needed a change, and the win was almost destined a little bit. Like, the team needed it, the organization needed it. And the Panthers are what they are at this point. Whatever, not important to this. But yeah, he's got a lot of playmaking guards, and so I think that's very, very cool. And Bradshaw and Stewart are both lob threats. Like that's definitely a boon to the offense and just the creation. I'm just curious. Like a lot of teams, I'm kind of curious about the spacing a little bit. I don't know.
The shooting on paper doesn't look great. I will say that.
The upside is totally there. Like when people are kind of planting their flags a little bit that this will be a top 4, 5, 6 team in the conference. Like I can understand. I'm not totally there yet, but I see the vision at least, and especially when like you can give spot minutes to a guy like Mobley too, who can kind of be a little bit of a scoring engine off the bench.
I think defensively they'll be okay, actually.
Yeah.
Bradshaw, Stewart, Parrish, to me, that's a perfectly fine defensive group, especially with the athleticism. Parrish is really switchable. We saw that at San Diego State. So I think there's a solid foundation here of, like, they could play perfectly fine defense. It's just like, is the 8-3 record like truly indicative of what we can expect from Jake Diebler moving forward? Hard to say. It's hard to say really what to expect at all, because he does have most of the guys who are going to contribute to this team haven't played together. So just right there, like I think you have a hurdle, and plus some of those guys, like Keith Glover, he was at Kansas State last year and didn't play. So, I mean, 2 years ago for Samford, he was really good, but he didn't play last year. So you kind of have a collection of guys like Sean Stewart and Aaron Bradshaw barely played last year. So you got to get everybody on the same page, and you need multiple guys to hit. And so there's talent for sure, and there's a lot of upside, I think, but the floor is pretty low. I think the range of outcomes for Ohio State is pretty wide, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Next up, we have Penn State. The Nittany Lions.
So many teams in this conference.
Oh, this is a nightmare, dude. This is a nightmare. So this, to me, feels like it's going to be the Ace Baldwin show. I mean, after that, I'm just not really sure. Like, I know Mike Rhodes, he's trying to just bring VCU to the Big Ten and play this grinded-out defensive style. The problem is when every other team just has better athletes than you, you're going to get outplayed from a physical standpoint. You just are. And I think that's a lot of what we saw with Penn State last year. Like, Ace Baldwin rocks. Ace Baldwin's awesome on both ends of the floor. One of the best two-way players in the conference. I think he's another guy who has a great chance to be a first-team all-conference player. It just, yeah, like, when you factor in the team success, it's like, yeah, the voters at the end of the season will be like, Penn State was, they were 4-16 in the Big Ten this year. Like, do we really want to give the nod to Ace Baldwin? But then again, the Big Ten first team is like 20 guys, so maybe that doesn't matter as much.
Yeah, I really don't know what to make of this roster. On paper, I really like the Freddie DeLeon addition.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I know he didn't pan out or work at, or maybe he just is going to benefit from a change of scenery than from Knoxville. But again, one of those, just upside swings. There was a reason he was ranked so high coming out of high school. I do like that. I mean, it's just, again, one of those teams that, like, on paper, the spacing isn't there. I do love Puff Johnson being a guy. This is just something from having combed over their roster. Puff Johnson being a guy that only averaged 0.2 assists last season. That's like one of those scenarios. This is a separate argument, not at all separate tangent, not at all related to Penn State basketball. But 0.2 assists a game feels a lot like when you fail a class from not trying. Like, it's almost harder to do that than it is to pass,
Mm-hmm.
Like, you actively have to make a concerted effort to do that. I don't know. We saw, Brad Underwood have to kind of change his style, right, when he came from Stephen F. Austin when he got to Illinois. I could be wrong if I'm misremembering. But I just wonder if Mike Rhodes, maybe after this season, has to wrestle with that a little bit internally. Mm-hmm. Because last year, I know he was like, we're going to play the hyper pressurized defense that defined his teams at VCU, like you said, and it just didn't. I mean, they went 9-11, so it's not like it didn't work so much as, well, it kind of didn't work. I don't know. We still finished in the bottom half of the conference. But, yeah, I don't know. Is this team, on paper better than the one last year? I don't really know.
It's hard to say. Losing guys like Kanye Clary and Qudus Wahab is a problem, I think. Maryland legend Qudus Wahab, Georgetown legend Qudus Wahab.
Yeah.
I remember showing up to the Maryland Penn State game, and I knew that he was on the team, but it was so weird to see him on that team. It was so bizarre. I mean, it's tough to square. They were surprisingly another one of these teams that's surprisingly competitive in the Big Ten last year, which by the end of the season seems to be everybody. But you just factor in they have a legit star, they have a system that, proven or not, they have an identity, I think, as a team. One of the big questions I have is what the spacing is going to look like. It's Ace Baldwin is going to need some room to cook. And Penn State has a bunch of guys who theoretically can space the floor. It's just a question of whether they're going to reliably do that. So, DeMarco Dunn, we'll see what his role ends up being. Does he start? Is he one of the first guys off the bench? We'll see. But he's a guy who can shoot the ball. Zach Hicks, Puff Johnson, both of those guys can space the floor. So we'll see. I mean, there's a world where they're competitive again, but I am not really that high on this Penn State team, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of similar to Minnesota, where they have a star player who's going to put up a bunch of numbers, and the rest of the team is going to kind of let them down. Because I also, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm just not crazy confident. I understand they went 9-11 last year, but big picture, I'm not crazy confident that Mike Rhodes' VCU system is cut out for the Big Ten. And I think it's just a question, you can totally get away with that type of thing in the A-10. I think it's just a question of how long it takes him to realize that and pivot. Because he's a very good coach, and his VCU teams were good. But I think there kind of needs to be a little bit of an identity change for Penn State, whether it's this season or in the future, for them to start to be a little bit more competitive. The number 12 team in the Big Ten last year was the Maryland Terrapins. Disappointing year for sure for Kevin Willard and company. I said last year that a success for them would be winning a tournament game, which a lot of people pushed back on. A lot of Maryland fans were saying Sweet 16 or bust, which I thought was insane. And the amount of people who are just completely out on Kevin Willard, or at least are paying lip service to that idea after year 2, is wild to me. Year 1, that team overperformed, hit like their 99th percentile outcome, won a tournament game against West Virginia, and then lost to, who'd they lose to? Alabama? UConn? I forget. I think it was, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'm pretty sure it was Alabama, though, because they were the number 1 overall seed. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Maryland is another one of these teams that last year, three-point shooting was not their forte. One of the 15 worst, maybe even one of the 10 worst three-point shooting teams in the entire country by percentage. It was painful to watch them just hoist shots off the backboard. Jahmir Young is gone. He was a true number 1 option, one of the best Maryland players we've seen in the last 15 years. Jahmir Young was awesome. And he was the only guy that opposing teams really had to game plan for at all. We'd constantly get into these late game situations where it was so obvious the ball was going to Jahmir Young. He'd get triple teamed, and either he would hoist up a contested shot, he'd give the ball to somebody who wasn't going to make a shot at all, or just a shot wouldn't get up in the first place because just of all the pressure that was concentrated on Young. Losing him is a big deal. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's not, but I am pretty optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that Kevin Willard did a really good job in the portal, replacing not only Young, but also making up for some of the issues that plagued last year's team. So perimeter shooting is one of those things. You bring in Selton Miguel, you bring in Jacoby Gillespie, 2 guys who can shoot the rock, and then you just kind of count on some natural progression from a guy like Deshaun Harris-Smith. Rodney Rice is here, who at least can shoot in theory. Chance Stevens is coming off an injury, but he's supposed to be a knockdown shooter. His name's literally Sniper. If he can't shoot the ball, I'm going to be upset. And you know the defense is going to be there. This is a team that is currently the top defense in the Big Ten per Ken Palm's preseason projections. And that's something I'm very confident will return. It's a defense that's anchored by Julian Reese. You know exactly what Julian Reese is going to give you. He's going to be a double-double machine. He's going to at least give you 10 and 8 every night, which you love to see. My thing with Julian Reese is okay, you're entering the closing years of your collegiate career. And up to this point, I think Julian Reese has always had the potential to be one of the best centers in the Big Ten. He's always had, I think, that as his upper end outcome. And with Zach Edey gone, right, with some of these great bigs leaving the conference, I think that potential is absolutely still there. But I need to see him step into that because it feels like for the past couple of years, he could have been the 3rd best big in the conference, but no matter who's there, who leaves, who shows up in the Big Ten, it feels like he's always the 6th best big in the conference, no matter what. No matter who else is on other teams. He's one of the most experienced guys in the conference at this point. He's been around the block for a while now. He should be able to just physically dominate some of these other teams who have questions in their front court. Obviously, Umar Ballo's here. I think we're expecting something big from at least one of the bigs that Purdue has. Beyond that, it's dude, you should be one of the best bigs in the conference. So I like what I see from Maryland on paper. I do. I think defensively they'll be really good. I think they did address the shooting problems from last season. I don't know. Am I crazy for being optimistic about this team, Alex? You tell me.
No, we should all be optimistic about our teams.
Okay.
That's what the preseason is for.
Sure.
I don't know. As an outside observer, I may question a little bit if this team totally addressed its shooting concerns. Like last year was really boring.
I know.
Like that.
No.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, not good.
So, respectfully, it can only go up. You know, it can't really get much worse.
Right. Yeah.
And Derek Queen is a monster.
He rocks. I didn't even bring him up. Just casually, like, we have a 5-star freshman on our team. He rocks. Yeah.
Again, I think I'm overusing fascinated, but very intrigued to see how a Reese Queen front court complements each other, especially with neither being a shooter.
Yes.
And teams already probably, I mean, I guarantee you teams in the non-conference are going to come in disrespecting Deshaun Harris-Smith. And I don't know if it's disrespecting so much as it's more of a proof that we need to guard you out there type thing.
Yeah.
And not keep you from barreling downhill towards the rim.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is like a top 50, 55 team in the country and probably top half of the Big Ten, or right around, hovering around like that 9 to 11 range, which is still going to be good and flirting with the bubble. Like, the defense will be there. And in the same way that I think you talked about Wisconsin winning like grimy, ugly games, I think that could be Maryland again.
Sure.
No? Yeah. Like, I don't know if I'm off base on that, but
I don't know that you are. I'm holding out hope that the offense looks at least a little bit more competent this season than it did last year, because we have more guys who I think can make something happen. Yeah. The two bigs on the floor question, I am going to give them the benefit of the doubt that it'll work until they show me that it can't. Because I think Julian Reese has a lot to offer. I think Derek Queen's awesome, just super skilled. The one part of it that gives me pause is the spacing of it all, coming off a year where the three-point shooting was absolutely abysmal. And you bring in guys who are really good at getting to the rim in Gillespie, and you bring back Deshaun Harris-Smith, who, like, I think he's best when he's able to attack downhill. How does that look when you have two bigs on the floor? Like, is that just, like, gone now? So that's the one thing that gives me pause with the two big fit. But it's like, if we're going to put two bigs on the floor, I don't know that there's two bigs like I would rather have, across the Big Ten. I don't know. I mean, I understand like there's the Renaud Ballo front court for sure, but if you're going to try to make it work, I think these are the two guys that you can have and make it work. Maybe we'll see. Derek Queen at least offers the potential of stretching the floor. Maybe. Kinda. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe he'll surprise us.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll surprise us.
I think that's a really optimistic.
Oh, yeah. Admittedly. Here's the final thing I'll say on Maryland. I think a success for this team, and I said it on the Two Pointers podcast when we went on, I think success for this team is just make the tournament, honestly. You have a lot of new faces. You're coming off a year where you missed the tournament. Just make the tournament. And if Kevin Willard can show that he can get there 2 out of 3 years, especially in this just disaster of a Big Ten, I'll be happy with that. And I think that should be what a success is. Because I think the expectations were a little too high last year. And I think that's a much more realistic bar to set given how last year went. Also, their non-conference schedule is cake. It is just miserably bad team after miserably bad team. So if they make the tournament, that means they did pretty well in conference play. Because I don't think the non-conference is really going to sway it one way or the other. Yeah, they have a game against Villanova, but like whatever. They have a game against Marquette. That's kind of like the highlight, I think, of their non-conference schedule. But if they make the tournament, it means they probably had an all right season when it comes to Big Ten play. So, yeah, I think make the tournament is a reasonable expectation. That's all I'll say on Maryland. Next up, we got why did I say Arkansas? The Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Obviously, the headline here, 2 5-star freshmen playing in Piscataway, New Jersey. I mean, it's just going to be awesome. And we saw a little bit of it in their exhibition that they just played. Dylan Harper, it's awesome when you have freshmen who don't look like they're freshmen. Like, they don't play like it at all. And that can definitely be said of Dylan Harper. Ace Bailey's just so physically gifted and physically talented. Sometimes he does look like a freshman out there because he just does something completely stupid and the shot selection is maybe a question mark. But he's going to have games where you're like, is this guy going to go number 1 overall in the draft? Like, that's how good Ace Bailey can be. And I think Dylan Harper is just going to be steady for him. They bring back Jeremiah Williams, who was, I think, their leading scorer last year. And it's a really interesting team. My one question for Rutgers, and then I'll let you chime in. I've been talking a lot. I just talked about Maryland for way too long. Steve Pikiell has long subscribed to this strong defensive identity with Rutgers, where they slow it down, they grind it out, and they've been successful because they have such a good home court advantage at the rack, and they've had good enough players to where, yeah, they can make that work and they can be competitive in the Big Ten. But now you have 2 super dynamic offensive players coming in as freshmen. So do you just open it up and let them cook? Because that's kind of what it felt like in the exhibition game. Steve Pikiell was just like, you guys go do whatever you want. And it looked great for them. Like, for Harper and Bailey, it looked great. But Rutgers as a whole maybe wasn't as sharp defensively as I think we've become accustomed to with Steve Pikiell teams. But then you run the risk, if you're like, we're just holding fast to that identity, then maybe you stifle a little bit of what Harper and Bailey can give you. So I think there's maybe a little bit of give and take there. That's kind of my big question with Rutgers, but I think just the talent that they have is so uncharacteristic of a Rutgers team. I really hope this is one that I hope this works out. Absolutely. I think college basketball, we will be the better for it if this team ends up being really good. But we'll see, because again, I do think that there's maybe some competing ideologies at play here.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. I'm excited to see what Ace Bailey's like shot diet looks throughout the course of this year, because he
large.
Large for sure. He like, and I know I find myself at times subscribing to the whole he doesn't create like maybe a ton of like the quote unquote scoring advantages scouts like to hype on. Like there were times where he got kind of like bumped in that exhibition and just like stopped dribbling and just picked it up. But because he's 6'10", he just elevated over the defender and buried a like contested 18-foot mid-range jumper, which I don't know what you do at that point. You know, it's like you can nitpick he got kind of like bumped off balance and like just picked up the ball, but then it's like he buried the shot. Like I think, like you said, he more than Harper is going to have those like, what are you doing freshman moments, especially maybe if he's like, I know he got trapped a couple of times and like it was easily kind of taken from him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's such an explosive athlete. He's just such a good scorer, and I wonder how. I hope Pikiell's system has him more checked in defensively than I think he showed in high school. And again, high school is high school. I don't think guys like that are always checked in every possession. But yeah, Harper I think is the best freshman in this conference. So I wasn't surprised by anything he did in that exhibition. Like he's just, you kind of knew he was just such a known commodity. I think coming in, and you just kind of expected that level of just everything that he can provide in terms of his creation, playmaking, shooting, all of it. Yeah, I like you said, I think it's the trade-off of what do you do maybe defensively at all, like to open up the offense. Can you have like Agbole on the floor, or do you have to maybe go smaller just to like space it out a little bit? Um, I know Dirk Hack isn't playing in Merrimack's like patented zone anymore, so I'm sure that's adjustment. But he also was like flying around in that exhibition and showing why he was um, the NEC's conference the defensive player of the year. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know. The Martini ad was really good. Jeremiah Williams is good. So is Davis. Like these are all good pieces. I think this is probably again ceiling. Like if Harper and Bailey both hit, like this ceiling could be what it be. I don't know about kind of like the rest of the team, maybe a little bit.
Well, yeah, so like I wouldn't even say that like Harper and Bailey hit it. I think they just will hit. Like
Yeah.
I think they're both going to be awesome.
Yeah.
You're right though. Like there's interesting complementary offensive pieces here. Like Jeremiah Williams is a guy who can get downhill. He averaged 12 points a game last year. He can handle the ball a little bit. They're bringing Tyson Akoff, who scored 21 points a game last year for Eastern Michigan. And then you have a couple, stretch forwards in Martini and Hayes, who didn't do anything crazy last year from like a production standpoint, but they can space the floor. And that's kind of what you need when you have a lot of these guys who can attack downhill. And it's not like this team has bad individual defenders. Like I think Bailey and Harper especially is like a very good defensive player. It's just like, what is Rutgers going to prioritize this year? Are they going to prioritize making sure Harper and Bailey are just getting their shots up? They're going to be like number 2 and 3 in the NBA draft? Or is it like we have to play good team basketball, you know? So we'll see with Rutgers. I mean, Ace Bailey, just from like a pure I like to watch basketball standpoint, is going to be up there for me for players that I'm like specifically tuning in to watch, and probably one of the players this year where you can use was it Paul George who after that Damian Lillard shot was like, that's a bad shot.
That's a bad shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's going to be that's I think going to be used pretty often for Ace Bailey this year. Or the Patrick Ewing, like you practice that shot.
But
when have you ever practiced that shot? But he does.
He does.
Yeah, he does, and he hits a good amount of them. So Rutgers is interesting, high ceiling, and like not even the lowest floor either, I would say. Okay, let's keep it moving. Next up, we got
Michigan, right?
Yes. The last place finisher in the Big Ten last year, the Michigan Wolverines. Big identity change this year. Big identity change. So, the former head coach, Mr. Happy Slappy himself, is out the door. Sorry. Juwan Howard's out the door. You bring in Dusty May, who was, desired by pretty much every high major team in need of a coach last year. And he did fantastic things at FAU. So I think there should be a lot of optimism that he can turn the ship around for Michigan after a disappointing end to the Juwan Howard era. And he brings in some very, very good players, including Vlad Golden, who, as far as centers go in this conference, I actually think Vlad Golden might be kind of underrated in the grand scheme of things. I don't think enough people are talking about how good he can be. Like, we've seen what he did on a national scale for FAU, and you're telling me he's not going to be really productive for Michigan as well. I just think when you have the conversation of like really good bigs in the Big Ten or just in the country at large, like Vlad Golden doesn't really come up as much as I think he should. But anyway, they're also going to do this weird too big kind of experiment, which is in a way similar to Maryland's because you have the power big at the 5, the Vlad Golden, Julian Reese type, and then you have the more skilled big who Danny Wolf can probably stretch the floor a little bit better than Derek Queen will, but you have like the skilled big who's more in that kind of 4 type of role. So Michigan has Danny Wolf taking those responsibilities, coming off 14-9 at Yale last season. So that's the front court, which I like. I'm intrigued by it. I'm fascinated by it, to use your word. And then they bring in Trey Donaldson and Roddy Gale Jr. to run the backcourt, which pretty solid. You know, I don't hate it at all. Roddy Gale's a guy that I think people forget about. Like he's pretty solid. So it's I don't know. Beyond those guys, I'm a little bit lower on the surrounding pieces. I know there are people who are like in love with this Michigan roster. I'm not going to say I'm in love with it, but as far as their top 4, top 5 guys, I like it. And I like Dusty May, so.
Yeah. I just think the whole kind of flexibility and versatility, I know those are 2 like buzzwords that maybe are overused in basketball these days, but I think it applies to Dusty May's teams because I know he talked about in the offseason, I think he was quoted as saying something to the effect of that, like, he views, like, 1 through 4 as kind of interchangeable across this roster. You know, it definitely looks that way in the makeup. I mean, let me just pull it up at this point. Donaldson's the shortest of the kind of backcourt quartet of Donaldson, Jones, Gale, and Namari Burnett. And I think that to me is a backcourt with like a super high floor where you really know what you're getting. I guess maybe the one concern is who's getting the rock in late game scenarios when it's close. I think it's Gale. I don't know if that is maybe going to lead to a ton of success, but yeah, I like the roster. Like I think the Wolf Golden pairing can work. Walters and Shetter can both shoot. Like they just as in terms of floor spacing, wings are bigs just off the bench. Defensively, I like the pieces. Like I don't know. It's hard not to like Dusty May and just kind of this roster he's assembled. Like I think they're going to be extremely competitive at kind of the top of the conference. So that's kind of. I think I'm probably a little higher on them.
Okay.
Than
Yeah.
you are.
I like the outlook.
Yeah, I'm also trying not to like talk too much because we're approaching the 2-hour mark.
Yeah, it'll get cut down a little bit, but yeah, we're gonna keep it moving, and you can hear like the weariness in our voice as we move through these teams. I think so.
Yeah, I got it.
But yeah, anyway, Michigan. I like the outlook for Michigan. We'll end there.
Yeah.
Next up, we're moving on to the newcomers. We got 4 of them. We'll start with. We'll just go in alphabetical order. So we'll go Oregon, the Oregon Ducks. Universally regarded, I think, as the best newcomer to the Big Ten, and they do have a very good roster that I'm pretty high on. I'm buying the Jackson Shellstad breakout. I don't know that I buy like first team All Big Ten Jackson Shellstad, but I'm buying like he's going to be a legit one for this team. And the Oregon brings back a bunch of guys from a team last year that could have gone pretty deep in the NCAA tournament. A lot of that was because of the heroics of N'Faly Dante and Jermaine Couisnard, who are no longer there. But there's a framework here, I think, for continued success. And some of that is with Jackson Shellstad and whether he breaks out. But bringing in TJ Bamba, I think, is great. You have Nate Biddle back. Kwame Evans is back. Keyshawn Barthelemy back. Mookie Cook is back. We'll see if he's able to kind of step into a larger role. He'll probably be coming off the bench. Supreme Cook, Georgetown transfer. It's with Fairfield before that. Put up 10 and 8 last year for Georgetown. He's made it happen in a power conference. So there's good stuff here for sure. And you know, Dana Altman over the last couple of years, like he's had teams that he's gotten it done with. He's had teams that have maybe disappointed relative to expectations, but on the whole, I think he's a great coach. I think he's going to do just fine in the Big Ten. And I like this Oregon team a lot, I think. I don't know that maybe my tiers will sort of disagree with what I'm about to say here, but I'm not sure I buy the league champion upside with Oregon, but I think they'll be very, very good, at least in regards to final conference standings. I think they're a top 5, top 6 team in the league.
I think I diverge from you a little bit there. I think I buy the Big Ten champion upside push, mostly because they are entering, and I think that's a benefit for all 4 teams entering the conference, that they are entering in a year where there isn't a presumptive favorite. There isn't a clear number 1. There isn't a clear even number 2. There's such, we've talked about the parity just even across the bottom. It's the same case can be made at the top. So especially too, I think there's, they're going to have to do a lot of traveling, but I do think that there's a benefit that when teams have to go to Eugene, that maybe they're not as well equipped for the travel.
Sure.
I do think that there's a real benefit to that. I really like the Bamba and Angel ads, just as kind of those veteran presence. And yeah, I just think the sophomore class of you want to just talk about swinging for the upside fences, Shellstat, Evans, and Mookie Cook, that trio. We talked about it a little bit with the sophomore trio or sophomore contingent at Michigan State. I think it's this same kind of case here for Oregon. Really leaning on it. I too am buying the Jackson Shellstat hype. I don't know. Maybe it's watching so much of Ryan Hammer talk about him. But he can really pour it in. He's an Oregon kid. I know Dana Altman likes to talk about how he went to the same high school as Peyton Pritchard. So, if that's not a key marker of success, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this just feels like a team that, I know last year they were kind of up and down. This just feels like a team that they can settle in. They're deep, and especially just in a year, like I said, where there isn't. Purdue's the top dog, but that's more maybe on pedigree. I think teams feel like they can attack Purdue and maybe in ways they couldn't the past couple of years. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Oregon, there's enough shooting, there's enough athleticism. The one thing that gives me pause a little bit with Jackson Shellstad is it isn't even a thing with Jackson Shellstad. It's just I feel like every year there's these consensus sophomore breakout guys that just don't. And that's kind of what makes me nervous is that label to me is a little bit cursed. So is he going to be...
Has you nervous?
Tyrese Proctor, Riley Kugel has me a little bit nervous as well. And that's not even a Jackson Shellstad thing because, like I said, I think he's going to be really good. And maybe I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here because if he is a true one like I think he can be, and Oregon is a top 5 or 6 team in the conference, then he probably will be first team All Big Ten. So maybe I do buy first team All Big Ten Jackson Shellstad at the end of the day. But yeah, I think it actually is to their benefit that there's 4 teams coming in from the West Coast to the Big Ten, so they can kind of run the west part of the Big Ten in a way. I think they're better than all 3 of those other teams. And so that gives you a solid basis of it's not like an SMU in the ACC situation where you're just going to bouncing back and forth from one coast to the other. They at least have kind of this central base as far as travel goes where it's not crazy wearing on them. I don't know if that makes sense. But yeah, I see the vision with Oregon. I see the vision. All right, next newcomer is UCLA. Alex, get us started on UCLA.
A team that, Mick Cronin's press conferences in the first 3 months of the season last year. Oh goodness! Didn't one of them wasn't he questioning their basketball IQ and just their intelligence, and then they were getting. They had some it felt like a team that quit mid-season, and then they were just, I don't know, late January, February rolled around into March, and they were like, nope, we're back. We're back. These are the Bruins. Yeah, they get back You lose Adembona, which I'm sure Mick Cronin would have liked to keep instead of seeing him off in Philly now, backing up Shirley Joel Embiid. But you get back Dylan Andrews, you get back Sebastian Mack, so there's your kind of backcourt duo that you were looking for. I'm sure he's expecting more than 10 minutes a game from Ademara this year. I think the Trent Perry ad is interesting and maybe a little underrated. I think he's probably going to get lost in the backcourt shuffle early, but I find it. You want to talk about, it's not even a breakup because he got released of the NLI, but in terms of a guy that like looked billed to Virginia and then just like deuces and goes to UCLA as like the 14th guy without a scholarship. I just find that funny. Anyway, Kobe Johnson, one of the better portal ads in the conference, I think, just in terms of style and play fit for a coach, especially. Like that's gonna work. Like he's
Oh yeah.
yeah, like that such a good coach player fit.
Mm-hmm. And Mick Cronin is all in on that too. I think he said at media day, like I don't understand why more people aren't picking him to be a Big Ten, like an all conference player. And I kind of tend to agree because he's a fantastic two-way guard. And if UCLA is able to hit their ceiling, then like you're telling me one of these UCLA players isn't going to make, first team all conference if UCLA ends up being good. I beg to differ.
Yeah. And so I don't want to make sure I'm missing anybody. I think I forgot to mention Lazar Stefanovic in terms of kind of that returning, I guess kind of like lead trio, I guess, now.
Mm-hmm.
You get William Kyle from South Dakota State, a guy that averaged 13 and I think 7, averaged like a block and a half per game. You kind of swing, you get the upside swings a little bit with Sky Clark and Eric Daly. Maybe you can get something out of them off of the bench. And then you add Tyler Bilodeau from Oregon State too, a guy who averaged 14 and 6 for the Beavers last year. So, yeah, there's a lot to like with this roster. Definitely one that's going to contend at the upper part of the conference. I do feel like UCLA is also a team that some have kind of flirted with being in that top 3. Could be wrong, misremembering people.
I've seen it a couple places, and I get why. There are some moving pieces to this, and I think Mick Cronin kind of tried to thread the needle by like picking out the guys who just like weren't working last year and replacing them, like kind of like handpicking the guys that he wanted to stay and being like, the rest of you just get out of here. It's just a question of like, did he pick the right guys to stay and the right guys to go? I'm very, very interested in this backcourt. You mentioned Andrews and Mack. Johnson's going to be great defensively. You have a guy like Dom Harris, who's just like a knockdown shooter, who will be coming off the bench. He shot 45% from 3 for LMU last year. Lazar Stefanovic, almost 40% from 3. Having that shooting off the bench, I think, is going to be huge. Sky Clark is an interesting play for me. He's been part of a couple just all-time bad vibes teams, and UCLA was not a good vibes team last year. I'm not saying that that's Sky Clark's fault. I think it's more just a coincidence that he was on the Illinois team that fell apart and kind of got run out of there, and then Louisville was just miserable, but he kind of needed somewhere to go. Anyway, yes.
Is Sky Clark just an all-time bad vibes guy? He was on that Montverde team his senior year that got upset by Sunrise Christian in nationals. Montverde was the number 1 overall seed, expecting to win another national. They did not. Obviously, they won.
Yeah,
this year.
I don't know what Mick Cronin has told Sky Clark, obviously.
I don't either.
But the expectation for him coming in should be that he's not the guy. Like, they have their backcourt coming back. They have a guy in Kobe Johnson who's going to get a ton of minutes. As long as Sky Clark doesn't have the expectation that he's coming in to be the number 1, like the lead guard or like even a starting guard, I think everything will be fine. If that expectation has not been communicated, then maybe they run into issues. But I think just as long as everybody on this UCLA team knows what their role is, they should be fine. It's just, do you fall into that just, bad vibes, miscommunication, everything falls apart and you finish below 500. I don't think so. I think the talent on this roster is enough to where they'll figure it out. But something to consider. Something to consider for sure. Cool. Next up, USC. Eric Musselman. I mean, Eric Musselman's return to the West Coast it'll be something to behold for sure. Brought in 13 new guys via what he and his staff referred to as the portal house because they had limited time to rebuild their roster. They holed everybody up in like a beach house and just started cold calling guys to try to get them to come down to Los Angeles. And he built out, I mean, a decent roster to his credit. I don't think it's the best one that Musselman has ever had. I'm sure he would tell you differently if you asked him. But some good pieces for sure. Like, I really like Desmond Claude, and I really like St. Thomas. I think those guys could each have a fantastic year. I pegged St. Thomas as a breakout guy this year. And breakout is more related to, like, the jump up in competition from Northern Colorado to USC. But from, like, a production standpoint, 19-9-4 last year for Northern Colorado. He's an absolute stud, and so I'm hoping that that's something he's able to continue. Desmond Claude was very good for Xavier last year. He averaged 16 points a game. Didn't shoot the ball the greatest, but, you know, put the ball in the hoop in other ways, so you take that. And then it's kind of a who's who of names. Like, you have Josh Cohen, Terrence Williams II, Bryce Pope is here. Like, it's an interesting roster that I don't think, like, top to bottom is the most talented, but it's definitely experienced. And they have a couple guys who I think can be the go-to guys. So, I don't know.
I don't know. They don't have a point guard. Like, is Desmond Claude at point guard gonna work? Are you playing slacker there?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
no
Xavier
chance.
kind of tried to force that whole thing last year, and it didn't totally work.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. Listen, I'm a big fan of just, like, experimenting with a bunch of 6'7" wings and trying to see if it works, and that's clearly what Muss is going to roll out this year in LA. Yeah, I don't really know. Like, I don't know why last year's Arkansas fiasco is sticking with me, because it shouldn't, given Muss's resume. But it really is, and especially assembling like 13 new pieces in a new conference for him. Like, I don't, man, oh man, there's a lot of skill and like talent on this roster. That piece of it, I think, is undeniable. I just don't know. To me, you took a lot of guys that want to be the guy, or coming from places where they were the guy, and I don't know how many of them, if at all, you're going to be able to like get into defined roles, or if you're just going to kind of roll the ball out there and hoop.
yeah, so he's bringing in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, almost 10 guys who averaged 10 or more points a game last year.
There are not enough shots in a game.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 who averaged at least 15 points a game last year. Unfortunately, the math is not as simple as just adding all those numbers up, and that's how many points your team is going to score.
USC is going to average 140 points per game this season.
The best offensive team we've ever seen in college basketball. I don't even think, I think this USC team is going to miss the tournament. I don't even think that should be considered a failure for USC, because this roster is not like a Musselman proof of concept roster. It's just like, we needed bodies and like we got them. So like, let's just see what we can do. But I don't think this is like Eric Musselman. I don't even think Eric Musselman is going to the season. Like, yeah, he's going to try to win as many games as he can, but I don't think he's sitting there like really pressed about if this season doesn't go the way that he wants. Like, he had very limited time to cobble together this roster, and a lot of other coaches in that same situation would have walked out with a significantly worse team than he did. So I think that's a win in and of itself, is just having guys who, like, this is a perfectly not great Big Ten roster, but it's like yeah, this is a Big Ten roster that I'm not really thinking twice about.
Yeah.
That's USC. I don't know. Like,
yeah, USC. Yeah.
I don't think they're going to, yeah. USC is going to average just 140 points a game.
It's crazy. We've never seen anything like that.
All right, last one, finally. The Washington Huskies. Danny Sprinkle coming in from Utah State off of a tournament appearance. Very good showing in the Mountain West last year for that Utah State team. And he brings his star player with him. He brings Great Osobor, who's going to be a double-double machine. He's another guy. I didn't mention him earlier when I was talking like best bigs in the conference. He's totally up there as well. He's going to dominate like physically. I just don't know beyond him what Washington is really planning on doing. I mean, is Zoom Diallo the point guard?
I think so, right?
I mean, yeah, he's not bad. It's just like
freshman point guard.
4-star freshman point guard. Not a great place to be if you're trying to be like a competitive team.
Yeah. Does Osobor start alongside Kepnang?
Well, it's weird. So Osobor is so interesting because he plays like he's 7 feet tall, but he's not. He's 6'8". You don't know that, though, watching him.
No.
Just from a size perspective, it's like it probably makes sense to slide him down and have Kepnang, who's 6'11", play the 5. But from a skill perspective and just like what you want to see, Osobor still averaged 1.4 blocks a game last year. You know? I mean, I don't like Kepnang had season-ending knee surgery last year. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's like one part where it's like maybe you're just better off starting Osobor at the 5. And I think that's probably what Sprinkle will tend towards, given that Osobor's his guy. Like, I don't know. I think he's going to try to put him in the best spot to succeed and then just build everything out around that.
Great Osobor's going to spend, 35, 36 games trying to prove that he's worth $2 million. Or whatever he was valued at in the portal.
I mean, yeah, when you factor in the price tag of all of it, then yeah, like he's gonna be getting a lot of touches down low.
And DJ Davis from Butler is a good ad too. I don't want to not mention him.
Yeah,
I just think it's the Osobor and then Davis show, and then I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And by we don't know, I think that's just a nice way of saying we know it's probably not going to be good.
End up.
I'm joking.
Man, 18 teams.
18 teams. It's a rebuild year for Washington. Yeah, it's the Osobor and Davis show, and this team is going to be bad, but I saw somebody I've been seeing people release their Big Ten rankings over the past couple weeks. I saw somebody put them at like 11.
No.
It's way too high, I think, but just proof that like there's people out there who think that Washington can make something happen. So maybe all won't be lost, but yeah, it's not us though. Not us, sadly. Okay, very quickly. Let's do the tiers, and then we'll give just like some quick shouts for who we think will be first team all conference. We're not going to go like 10 guys. We're going to go like 5.
Got it.
Okay. So, Alex, for those viewers out there who did not watch the Big Ten preview, can you take us through, the ACC preview, can you take us through the tiers that we are going to be doing today?
We've got, I believe, conference champions or league champions, and you can interpret that as that. If you want to make them a national title contender, do whatever you want. It's the tier. Then just tourney teams. Those select few on the bubble. Get ready to learn NIT, buddy. And then why are you playing the games?
Great. Love it. All right, so starting out, Tier 1 league champs. How many teams you got in there, and who are they?
3. I had Purdue, Oregon, and then I had Indiana defying all reason and logic with Mike Woodson being in that.
Okay, I actually had 4. So I had the 3 you mentioned, and I threw Illinois in there as well.
Okay. I'm not there yet. I want to be there. But I'm not.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, Tier 2, the tourney teams. I'll start here. I had 3 as solid tournament teams. I went Michigan State, UCLA, and Maryland, actually. So, who do you got?
I had 5. I had Illinois, UCLA, Michigan, Michigan State, and Rutgers.
Gotcha. Okay. Tier 3, the bubble teams. Who you got?
I had 3. I had Ohio State, Maryland, and then USC defying just anything I think about that roster. Just hanging around the bubble all year.
I've got Ohio State, Rutgers, Michigan as my bubble teams. And the more I think about it, I probably would slide Maryland down into that bubble tier, but I'm biased. I mean, let's just be real.
Yeah.
All right, get ready to learn NIT, buddy. I think this is the most teams I have in any tier. USC, Nebraska, Northwestern, Iowa, Wisconsin.
I had all 7 of the remaining teams in this tier because I do think so I had Northwestern, Wisconsin, Iowa, Washington, Nebraska, and I had Minnesota and Penn State too because I don't think Minnesota and Penn State are bad enough to not be playing the games. I do think that they're the 2 most likely to lose in the conference. But, again, parity, I think that they could be flirting with an NIT bid and someone else is losing the games that I didn't foresee.
We need to make, the picture of Rob Lowe wearing the NFL hat? We need to get one of you wearing a Big Ten hat.
Yeah.
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 I don't think, none of these teams, I just want to watch Big Ten basketball. So all these teams can play the games for sure.
Yeah. All these teams can play.
Yeah, sure, guys, go ahead. In my just why tier, I have Minnesota, Penn State, Washington as a solid bottom 3. I almost put Wisconsin in there, but again, they're going to do things that defy all logic and reason, I think, and win games that you're just like, how did that happen? So, all right, that's our tier list. Moving on, let's just make some predictions for first team all conference. I think Braden Smith makes it.
Yes.
I think Umar Ballo makes it. I think whoever the best player on Indiana is will make it. I think that's Umar Ballo as of now.
I guess if I made 5 right now, it would be Braden Smith, Dylan Harper, Great Osobor, Umar Ballo. Then I'd go Peyton Sanford.
Okay. I don't mind any of those guys. I mean, I think it's kind of a crapshoot when it comes to this conference, especially because who's to say how the voters value crazy numbers when your team isn't very good? How much does your team success really matter at the end of the day? Because you're still putting up numbers against the same competition everybody else is. So, sort of hard to say. But yeah, I've Braden Smith, Umar Ballo. I think I might throw Bruce Thornton in there.
Okay.
As I alluded to, Jackson Shelstad to me makes a lot of sense. And then I think one of the star freshmen will make it, whether that's Harper, Bailey, or Kasparis. And I'll lean towards Harper because I think his floor is probably the highest out of all of them. So that's where I'll go with that. But yeah, with 18 teams, who knows? Because then you can get into guys like Ace Baldwin. You mentioned Peyton Sanford. If there's somebody from Maryland that, carries this team to a top 6 or 7 finish, maybe one of them makes it. It's just kind of hard to say. This conference is way too big. That's really what we're learning.
Yeah.
And with that, we're going to wrap things up. Goodness gracious, guys. I mean, can you just like this episode out of pity for us? I think that would be nice. We've been talking about the Big Ten for a significant amount of time, and we are ready to go to bed. So if you're on YouTube or Spotify, please like, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps us out a lot. Use the code Jimmer for 15% off at Home Field. Alex is sporting some Home Field merch over there. I should have worn mine. I have a Maryland Home Field shirt that for some reason I didn't wear. I just went with my basic Maryland hat. But yeah, if you want to support your favorite college team, best way to do that is with Home Field apparel. Code Jimmer gets you 15% off if it's your first time. Even if it's not your first time, just use our link. It's in the description. Clips will be out, timestamps, all that stuff. So if you don't want to listen to us ramble for an hour and a half about teams you don't really care about, then that's fine. You don't have to watch it. But anyway, that's going to do it for us. Episode 52 of the Jimmer Range podcast. Next time we're going to probably talk about the Big East because it's like half as big as the rest of these stupid conferences. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time.